W.
Welcome to the Warrant Officer History Foundation's Cohort W podcast. I'm your 2026 Warrant Officer Historical Foundation Fellow, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Marcus Harvey. This season is all about the history of the Warrant Officer as we celebrate our country's 250th birthday. Today's episode is a special one as we bring together several of the leaders who helped shape the fellowship into what it is today. Joining us are Dr. Hauser, who founded Cohort W and launched the very first season, Dr. Momini, whose cohort focused on senior warrant officers, Chief Warrant Officer Susie Albert, who explored change throughout the warrant officer cycle, and Jesse Moreland, who examined professional military education and its impact on our Corps. Today, we'll reflect on the origins of Cohort W, the evolution of the fellowship, lessons learned along the way, and where future fellows may take it next. I really appreciate each one of you taking time to come together and reflect on the history of this amazing opportunity. For those listeners who may not have heard your season, can you briefly reintroduce yourself and tell us what life has looked like since serving as a Cohort W host? We're going to start, of course, where Cohort W started, with Dr. Russell Hauser.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a privilege to be here in such wonderful company. Briefly, I'm Dr. Russ Hauser. I am now a retired CW5 420 Charlie, and my season focused on the practical work of what each warrant officer branch did and spinning that up into how it supported the Army. It was a good primer for me, and I think for the entire group of interviewees to really begin understanding at maybe a little bit different level what the Army's warrant officers collectively were doing. Since then, I've been doing a lot of research and writing about Army bands, warrant officers, and the 31st Infantry Regiment, and studying Russian. It was a really good way for me to get into warrant officer history and a little bit more of the Warrant Officer Association, and it's then transpired into further service for the Warrant Officer Historical Foundation.
Dr. Hauser, I speak on behalf, truly on all of us, when I say thank you for starting this. And as we continue to talk about the history of all our fellows, we'll now move on to Dr. Momini, who was the host of our second season.
Yeah, hi, and I just really appreciate getting a chance to join everybody. I was just telling Susie Albert off to the side via text, I forgot how hectic these interviews can be, and it's really quite enjoyable, at least from this side of it. Now, I'm CW5 retired Leonard Momini. I was a 153 Mike. I finished out my time at the Warrant Officer Career College as the outgoing department head for military history. I had gotten involved with the fellowship through a former mentor of mine and really just a pillar of the Warrant Officer Historical Foundation, CW5 retired Dr. John Robinson. And what ended up shocking both Dr. Robinson and Russell Hauser there was I wanted to continue the podcast. They thought I was going to do something, with respect to writing, because that's kind of more my flavor. And I thought, man, Russ had put in so much work on the podcast, and there were already so many downloads, so many followers, people were interested. I thought, man, we've got to continue this traction on. And so I proposed a new spin on it. I said we were going to go to the senior warrant officers of each branch. I say senior warrant officers because when we interviewed then CW3 Humphreys of the Chemical Corps, they don't necessarily have a 5 spot at their center of excellence and things. But I decided I was going to interview senior warrant officers from each branch and see what they were doing with respect to developing and preparing the next generation for large-scale combat operations. Sadly, behind the curtain, the title for the season that I had picked did not get selected. Both thought it was a little too playful. I was going to call it Unicorn Tales because we were getting stories about CW5, but they insisted we keep it professional. And so the rather humdrum Cohort W Season 2 was what everybody had to listen to. But Unicorn Tales, we were almost there, maybe on another project one day.
Sir, truly appreciate your contributions and for bringing in the history. While it didn't get named Unicorn Tales, we all know now what the original purpose was going to be. And absolutely thank you for keeping the podcast going. Next, we have Chief Warrant Officer 3, Susie Albert.
Thank you so much. And I am so excited to be back with everyone. I will say that an insecurity that I had about my season was production quality. Naturally, that comes from Dr. Russ Hauser as a 420 Charlie having an ear for these types of things. Of course, Mr. Momini, with being an aviator, came with an incredible attention to detail. And then I was followed by Jesse Moreland, who sounds like you should be on NPR. And so just apologies, some apologies now that I'm looking back on the experience. I do think that there were times when I held 4-hour interviews that were partially in my car that I edited later to be about 20 minutes. So what am I doing since Cohort W? I'd say mostly relying on the celebrity that came from my season, which of course was at one point in time the 44th most popular government educational podcast in South Korea, just to put that out there for all of us. Specific focus on becoming a warrant officer in those first couple of years, and then moving throughout the cycle of warrant officership. So ever since, I've been writing articles. My interests kind of revolve around academic rigor and instructional integrity. So what are we doing in our education system, and especially for warrant officers, and how can we make it better? Also, robotics integration into operations, which of course is the future for us, and ethics as a driver for combat lethality in the future. Just some light reading I do on the side. So I now work as the senior instructor at the Accelerated Warrant Officer Candidate School, which is at Fort McClellan, Alabama. And as our representative of Compo 2, the National Guard, in this group that we have, I am now, and since the season ended, proudly a member of the Alabama Army National Guard, and I am the only one here with this accent. And that's it for me.
Chief Albert, I think we all can agree that you had an amazing season, and we can all agree that bragging absolutely is warranted because you did have just an outstanding season. And as the most recent host, I can truly relate to the pressure that comes with filling in those big shoes. And the person who I replaced is up next, CW4 Jesse Moreland.
Well, hello, and what an honor to be here with all these great leaders, and especially to be here on this side of the mic. So again, thank you for the opportunity. Probably have one of the most challenging positions here, just following all these great and articulate leaders here. So I hope I do it justice. But again, CW4 Jesse Moreland. I am the fiscal year 25 Warrant Officer Historical Foundation Fellow and the Season 4 host of Cohort W. The topic, of course, of my Season 4 was exploring the modernization of warrant officer professional military education. And what have I been doing since? Well, I tell you, that year of hosting was so full of experiences, life-changing experiences, which first I do have to mention, I'm a new grandfather. So that was one of the the biggest life changes there. Also, I got qualified as a 420 Alpha human resources technician. So, some folks called me crazy, but after 25 years of being a warrant officer, I thought I'd start back and do it all over again. So I went back and attended WOBIC and qualified as a 420 Alpha. So have two MOSs, 420 Charlie Bandmaster and 420 Alpha. And so I'm still over at National Guard Bureau at Arlington, Virginia, within the G1 Personnel Policy Division, within the new branch, the Traditional Force Policy Branch. So I'm still helping assist our 51 Army National Guard bands in the management of that aspect, but I'm also being utilized to do more of those action officer, those 420 Alpha items, GDMLA, other taskers that come across the desk. So being utilized in a different way, and my lens is a lot more open due to the experiences and all this knowledge that I learned. I'm just using it to make a difference in everything that I do. So,
Chief Moreland, thank you for telling your story. And now I want to begin talking about the history of Cohort W. This season, again, is about the history of the warrant officer. And if we're going to tell that history, I found that great thing would be to start talking about those that are tasked with telling the history of warrant officers. So what I want to do is start at the beginning with Dr. Hauser. Dr. Hauser, take us back to the beginning. What inspired you to create Cohort W?
Well, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. I sent this thing out, and it basically said, we're doing this Warrant Officer Historical Foundation. I had just literally 3 or 4 months ago finished dissertation, defended successfully, thank God, and made it through the program at Boston University, Go Terriers, when this thing came across my desk. And I'm like, well, I really can't think about a traditional postdoc right now, but I can do this, and this will be my postdoc. And so I bid on it. I put in my credentials, my resume, and I'm probably the only the only person who submitted that year, and they picked me. And, it was like, second prize in a beauty contest. It was the best thing ever, I think. And so I spent about a month with this man that Leonard mentioned, John Robinson, who is now departed. He was truly a brilliant figure in the Historical Foundation. He had a great sense of calm and direction all at the same time. And he helped me with this idea that I had of, at least doing interviews. And he was the one who actually said, "Can you do a podcast?" And I'm like, sure, I could do that. I'd just done a bunch of interviews for my research. And when I started doing it, I'm like, holy crap, how does this work? And it was trial by fire, the first 5 episodes, and many thanks to those people who were my first interviewees. We figured some things out. I figured some things out. I got some good feedback. But essentially, the vision from John and the Historical Foundation was to try to connect the association and the Historical Foundation to those active warrant officers, those retired warrant officers, and those future warrant officers. And so that original vision, Dr. John Robinson's vision, to develop scholarship and outreach to meet the intent of preserve and educate of the Historical Foundation through this, fascinating medium of the podcast. Definitely John's idea. The Cohort W moniker, theme, and the other things. Fortunately, that was my idea that actually stuck and worked. But it's all secondary to the idea of the podcast and John Robinson. I think that whatever success we have found now has been through good fortune, hard work, and meeting a need for community in the warrant officers.
Thank you, Dr. Hauser, for starting this and just taking us back on what that journey looked like. Before we move on to the next season, what I wanted to ask you is, and what I think a lot of people want to hear, is when you see Cohort W today, what makes you the most proud?
Well, the fact that we've been heard in 95 countries of like 190 plus countries, the fact that we've, gotten over 30,000 downloads, almost 100 episodes, I think those are some of the things that make me proud. I think the real things that make me proud is just, again, being part of this and the friendship and the lineage that's been forged here as each person has found their voice and what they think is most important to share with our community. And to our many wonderful audience members who have taken the time to listen. So I think those are the things that make me most proud, the people.
Dr. Hauser, thank you again just for your thoughts. And of course, again, being the one to start this and to keep it going. What I want to do now is jump to the next season, our second season, with Dr. Momini, who had Unicorn Tales talking about CW5s. Not a lot of individuals get to interact with senior warrant officers. But Dr. Momini, you found a way to bring the thoughts and discussion with senior warrant officers to everyone through your season. So the question I'd like to ask is, what drew you to the topic of senior warrant officers?
I think you started off with whatever you do, don't say that's a great question, but that's a really great question. In Army aviation, we are fortunate enough to just have a plethora of W5s rolling around. I am not diminishing the accomplishment of achieving the rank of CW5 in Army aviation, but the reality is we make up approximately 40% of the total warrant officer strength. And so when you look at the limited number of CW5s in the other branches, I thought, wow, this would be wonderful to bring senior level mentorship from upon high, down to the ranks below, because there are folks that will go their entirety of their career in some of these areas and specialties, and they will have heard of a CW5, never have seen them. I believe Dr. Hauser's specialty, there were two on active duty, and then there was one in the Guard and one in the reserves. That's four. I mean, that's basically a, Captain Kirk and Spock level knife fight to eventually raise to the level of CW5 there. And there are so many folks that are just never going to get to interact with them. So I thought, we hear from colonels, we hear from sergeants major. Why not get it straight from the W5's mouth, who's sitting there as an advisor to that command group, and who's attempting to contextualize the reality of very significant problems and very technical aspects to them, so that we are represented. And because we are such a small population, you think 2.5% of the total force population is comprised of warrant officers. It's not very much. And so if you were able to bring that senior level of sort of insight from those master warrants, so to speak, I mean, I thought that was invaluable. And luckily enough, there were a lot of folks who were willing to contribute, but there was so much interaction, and it brought a lot of insight and knowledge to folks that would have never have had it. And it allowed for a more than reasonable mechanism to get, mentorship and insight from senior warrants all the way down to future warrant officer candidates. That's what was so fantastic about it. We were telling the story, and there were so many times, I'm sure through season one and then later in the early parts of season two, I was like, man, is anybody listening to this? And when you start to get that confirmation, and people saying not only were they listening to it, but they were finding it extremely valuable, well, that just meant the world. We were telling our story in the way that only warrant officers can tell it. And I think that's pretty incredible. So that's why I I loved that season, and that's why I still support the podcast today, and that's why I will continue to support the podcast and the Historical Foundation moving forward, because our story is worth telling.
Dr. Momini, I truly believe that everyone that is here and then the listeners agree with everything that you said. Our story is worth telling, and the fact that it gets told by warrant officers in, as you said, the only way that we can tell it is what makes doing the podcast such an experience for everybody who listens and who contributes. Before we move on, one of the things that I wanted to ask, based upon the fact that you were a senior warrant officer and also that your season was about senior warrant officers, what do younger warrants misunderstand about senior warrant officers?
Younger warrants are constantly assuming that senior warrants, especially at the W5 ranks, are somehow out of touch with the requirements or technical limitations at the lower levels. You know, what's reality look like for the majority of the population? And I really don't think that's true, because every senior warrant officer I've ever met is always dying to get away from whatever situation they may be in and get back down to the ranks. They want to stay grounded in what the challenges are for the day for any of the junior warrants, because the more grounded they are in that, the more effective they are as advisors to senior leaders in directing the efforts of their respective branches with respect to technical competence and systems oriented solutions.
Dr. Mamani, thank you again for bringing what you did to season 2 and just your thoughts and your reflection on it. As we continue to move through, now being in season 3, one of the things that has come from season 3 is just how popular all of those downloads have been. For that one, we have to thank Chief Warrant Officer 3, Susie Albert. So in your season, Susie, you talked about the change throughout the warrant officer life cycle. How did you come to that being your central theme, and what changed the most through that life cycle as you did those interviews? What did you find that changed the most?
Oh my gosh, Marcus, I chose change as the central theme. Obviously, when we look at the rapid pace of technological change, the imperative started to shift. And so looking at our quote unquote survivability as the warrant officer cohort, I really just chose, I think, to listen, because what I experienced in 2014 when I went through walks was rote memorization. It was not the demands that we actually see the warrant officers that we are welcoming now into the cohort. The demands are much different, and that's a massive change in the expectations and the application of warrant officers throughout our ranks. And so in such, and I will say, change and survival absolutely reliant on one another, and this is the theme of evolution. But I think that warrant officers' contribution to that is innovation. So the ability to look at something and say, well, gosh, that's stupid or inefficient or ridiculous or archaic, and say, I think I have a better way. And so having the ability to ask across generations, what does that look like? So throughout the season, I also was lucky enough to experience change through all of this and the connections we made and the podcast itself.
Susie, everybody has seen it, like the amount of downloads that your season generated. I know Dr. Hauser has spoken on, the number of downloads and the countries. As you went through that season, what do you feel changed the most through the life cycle of the warrant officer?
We'll say that I think the most interesting thing I was able to observe about change and the cycle itself is that one of my last episodes, I talked to retired Colonel Steve Leonard, who is the author of Doctrine Man. And he had talked about being essentially a soldier that was mentored, that was developed by warrant officers that came from the Vietnam era. And he jokingly refers to this as being raised by wolves. And I love this, like that absolute hunger and that drive and sort of like that relentless pursuit of excellence and survival, et cetera, and development of others. So he essentially said, when I looked as I was developing as an O grade, my relationship with risk had been shaped by really aggressive warrant officers who told me the truth early and often, and sometimes in pretty distasteful ways. and I see that ebb and that flow in the confidence that it requires, and even a singular person, a singular warrant officer. There are times when you have to listen and you have to learn about risk and you have to receive that guidance. And there is a time to execute silently with those lessons learned, make it mean something, and allow that relationship with risk that has changed throughout to really inform that you're not doing things recklessly, you're doing things creatively, you're doing things courageously, and in ways that, again, contribute to the force, the soldiers with you, and the mission that you really have. And so I saw that what I perceived to be a generational change was often most likely a change that even individual warrant officers experience through their PME journey, through their first assignment and second and third, and as they continue to accumulate deployments and tips and tricks. Ultimately, it all leads to that relentless self-development, a commitment to excellence, and a really healthy relationship with risk.
Chief Albert, thank you. One of the things that you talked about was about PME, which brings us into the focus of season 4. Chief Moreland, what led you to focus on PME?
Oh, wow. I think the biggest event that happened was the word of mouth that there was change coming within PME. And it was at that moment, it was the talk of the town. It was everybody was talking about it. When we went to the all members meeting, they had a panel up there discussing it, and it was on the tip of the tongue of every warrant officer around. Like what's happening, what's going on, and I think mostly people were wondering about the unknown. So to capture that moment in time, and I said, hey, let's look at this concept here of the modernization. Everybody's talking about it. Let's get some answers about it. And let's see if we can get our audience more engaged. So the popularity of the topic, and of course, the desire to want to know more about what was going on.
Another question I have for you in regards to your season is, as you talked about, a lot of different people had ideas about PME. What misconceptions about PME were challenged?
Probably the ones that stand out in mind is, when you, I guess, try to stereotype PME, a lot of people think that, hey, we got to check the box. We have to attend PME. It's a requirement for promotion. I didn't really hear about that perspective as much as I did the hunger for the development, the modernization for developing our warrant officers to become more relevant, more powerful leaders. I think of probably some of the conversations that actually Chief Albert and I had in one of our episodes, talking about what a warrant officer is, what PME was about. And I think originally I was looking for those specific differences between each community, each MOS. Like what are you going to have in your PME? What specific thing are you going to teach, or are you going to focus on? And with all of the diversity, there was a consistent answer that was, or a consistent piece of information that was coming from all of those communities. And that was that they were all searching and kind of articulating the same thing of what we are looking for in our future warrant officers: to be technically deep, operationally relevant, definitely adaptable, very good communicators, integrated. So I know we got some other things to talk about, but that's the biggest misconception that we challenged.
Chief Moreland, thank you for walking us through your processes and your experiences. I'd like to move into lessons, and this is where we're going to hear from everybody from the group. As the individuals who held the task of telling the story of the warrant officer, what do you think future generations of warrant officers need to hear the most right now? Starting off with Dr. Hauser.
Thank you. The thing that I think they need to hear, based off of the discussions that I had in season 1, is that warrant officers, regardless of your MOS, need to really dig into your branch's doctrine and beyond that. And by that, I mean dig into the operational research that proves, or that proved, your current doctrine, and ask, with all the changes in technology and all the changes in sort of the geopolitical realm in the past 2 years, is it still what you need to be learning? I think that's what I would push to current and future generations of warrant officers. And I think what we're going to hear now from the other teammates here is going to be just some fabulous things that I would never even imagine. So I'll toss to Leonard.
I'm going to dovetail off of what Russ said, as they're supplementing their knowledge of doctrine They need to do so realizing that the landscape of modern warfare is one of systems warfare. You know, you'll see a lot of writers out there like Amos Fox and others in the Small Wars Journal that talk about the changing landscape that we've seen in, say, the Russo-Ukraine conflict, Nagorno-Karabakh, moving on further today, and the conflict between Israel and Gaza, and Israel and Lebanon, and Israel and Iran, and the United States and Iran. Everything is systems based. You're seeing more systems oriented warfare than actual land based warfare, which is significant. People are relying upon technology. Sometimes it's low tech, low cost type situations that it's a COTS, commercial off the shelf type opportunity, and other times you're looking at COTS augmented by rudimentary automation, whatever it might be. There's a lot going out there that's system centric, and so I would tell them, and I think they need to hear this, that systems based warfare means success or failure rides on the shoulders of those technical experts that manage and integrate and train others on the Army's systems. You know, success rides on their shoulders with respect to implementation and integration of systems as contextualized with the current events. They need to move with a sense of urgency to stay up to date and try to professionalize all their efforts because folks are counting on it. And we can't be rudimentary in our professional practices where we're protecting stovepipes of disappointment and maintaining old tech or old practices. We have to be innovative and well read and know how to speak the language of our leaders so that when we are engaging in either advising or what I call leaderish practices of Army Warrant Officers, you know, we are making an impact because we are needed.
Sir, thank you. Chief Albert, over to you.
I think what I would consider extending to new warrant officers in this generation, whether they're just starting out or whether they're sort of up against their first significant mission, is how can I become deadly? How can I become unstoppable? And how can I become bulletproof in everything that I'm doing? So I think that, of course, as always, starts with the foundational principles of who you are as a person, a leader, and a warrant officer. And I really, really appreciate and respect and admire some, I'll say it was proposed doctrine that came up from Colonel Dennis Catolin out of the Marine Corps that looks at ethics as being a combat multiplier and as being a method to increase our combat lethality is knowing ourselves and insulating ourselves from moral injury in our decision making. And I love that. Of course, warrant officers have to look at processes, platforms, products. That I think we have a pretty good grip on. And then lastly, what is our purpose? So not just as the cohort, but as individual leaders and warrant officers, what do we mean in our formations that's different? And for me, what that turns out to be is not just having the courage to look around and say, is this effective and efficient? I think also having the courage to look around and say, how can I help? Like whatever that looks like, there's no task that's too big or too small or too complex. Because I will tell you, I'm the last person as a neo-Luddite. I'm the last person that should have ever had a podcast. I'm the last person who should have ever been interested in robotics. And here I find that I am sort of now involved in both of those realms. And so just having the ability to say, what is my purpose? How can I serve this larger mission, the larger unit, the larger cohort? And then tying all those things together, your principles, your processes and products, and of course, your overall purpose. I think those are the things that would create a deadly new warrant officer.
Thank you. Chief Moreland, over to you. Same question.
So a lot of great items and topics and were brought up in those responses. And just kind of going off of that, you know, Dr. Mose talked about the systems, Chief Albert talking about being deadly. I love that. So as these subject matter experts, we kind of get in these lanes and we get a narrow focus, but we really need to be very adaptable and open-minded because that little lane that we're in, that we're focused on, sometimes gets comfortable, and change, as we all know, could happen tomorrow. And we need to be ready for that. Our expertise, technical expertise, has an expiration date. So we need to keep extending that, learning more, being more adaptable, open-minded, and definitely recognizing the value of people. The value of people, because at the basis of the foundation of any system, of any doctrine, of anything out there is people. And we can't lose sight of that. Modernization of PME, the foundation of it is people and how we train those people. I think I heard a great leader, and Dr. Hauser, you might have to help me out with who that retired warrant officer was, but I heard a great leader at the all members meeting talk about the importance of networking, but how networking is not as effective if you don't work the net. So with networking, working the net, but remembering the importance of people, networking, and being adaptable, open-minded to change as it happens.
This season, the theme was always supposed to be about the history of the warrant officer. But my goal when I selected it wasn't just about telling the story of the warrant officer just to tell the story, but to also get us thinking about what we can pull forward or create for the future. What do you hope Cohort W becomes 5 to 10 years from now? Starting with our founder, Dr. Hauser.
This is probably the toughest question that you have actually asked me to answer. And I appreciate the opportunity to think and mull on this one. And I think that within the next 5 to 10 years, if podcasting is still a thing and we haven't all been replaced by AI versions of ourselves, I hope it becomes the go-to thing for sort of like modern history, or a great set of studies for somebody in the next couple years to take a look at collective things we have thought about and distill from them ideas that we each contributed, or that our people contributed, to produce something that's new, that I haven't thought about and that I can't imagine, which is really not that hard. But the ultimate goal of creating that new knowledge and sharing that new knowledge is something that I hope that this podcast yields in the future with somebody's reflection and study. And I apologize for that vague answer. It's still an outstanding question.
Dr. Momini, different question for you, sir. Just because what you brought in was talking about senior warrant officers, your approach to it and the reason that you came by it was just so interesting. What would you love to see a future fellow take a swing at?
I don't know. Perhaps one day a future fellow will come up and be bold. Everything seems temporary, and I say multiple media on which to collect, because one thing I've noticed at the Warrant Officer Historical Foundation, as we kind of pilfer through various records, and unless you've got quite a bit of time on your hand and able to rummage through a variety of digital libraries and archives and other things, the information on Army warrant officers and their accomplishments are pretty slim. Those things are kind of hard to find, and that means that our history is kind of hard to find and hammer out. And one thing that this podcast does is lays out our story for not just us, for others that might be interested in the Army as a whole, and where we've come from and where we're going. And I think that's pretty significant. So in 5 to 10 years, I hope that we're continuing the story. If the podcast is just one mechanism of doing that, wonderful. But it's just running into different media, because the story of the warrant officer is very. I mean, my father was a warrant officer. And working in the history department, the one thing I found from his class was a photo and a one-page memorandum write-up from the class historian upon what they had done that was graduating, and that was about it. And there you go. There went a whole year of a walk-based flight school and it just evaporated into a box. And it's somewhere in the bottom of Cleese Hall. That's kind of a shame. So our history is important, and I hope that we continue to lay that down with rigor and that people are excited to participate in it, not just today, but as we go forward.
Sir, thank you for your thoughts. Last question to Chief Moreland. Using only one word, how would you describe Cohort W?
Oh, obviously the first word that comes to mind is outstanding, but I'm going to go a little deeper than that. And I think if there's one word, I think I would use connection. I think it's just an outstanding tool, platform, whatever we want to call it, that brings us all together as a cohort with so many of our fellow cohort. Some of them one deep, two deep, spread out all over globally. I think Cohort W is that element that can bring everybody together, connect us together in a lot of our efforts, a lot of our thought processes, the way we think, what we're going after, and definitely be an advocate for the relevance of it, of the cohort, and help us, fight the good fight every day, adapt to change. So I think connection would be my word.
Chief Moreland, thank you for that. And thank you all for your contributions during your seasons. And a personal thank you for helping me tell my perspective of warrant officer history during season 5. Every season of Cohort W has added another chapter of the story of the Warrant Officer Corps. From Dr. Hauser's original vision to the exploration of senior leaders, change, and professional military education, each cohort has helped preserve experiences that might otherwise have been lost. To our guests, thank you for your contributions and for continuing to invest in the future of our profession. And to future fellows listening today, the next chapter is yours to write. I am Chief Warrant Officer 3, Marcus Harvey. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Cohort W. And remember, history informs the future, legacy inspires the next generation.
W.